the leader that is most effective is the one that's most on a mission themselves and then gets other people to believe in it. So like that's where I felt like I had to grow this year, was to get more clear, because I run such a business that could be construed as like a lifestyle business. Right. But I'm not just, dinking around, hanging out at the beach the other 30 hours of the week. I'm doing other things. So I had to, like I'm on a personal mission. I had to enlist the rest of the team and show them how the things that they're doing for the clients are having a bigger effect on their client.
Welcome to the People Leaders Podcast, the audio resource for managers and business leaders creating high-performing teams. Join leadership and team development experts Jen and Michelle Turkelson each week as they explore both subjects from every angle. Through practical tips, valuable insights, and compelling interviews with leadership experts around the world, you'll learn how to bring out the best in your staff and how to give your best as a leader.
Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Really excited for this podcast. Hey, Michelle.
Hey.
So we have a wonderful guest on. We have just been chatting for the last 5 or 10 minutes and Michelle said, press record. So we've got a guest, Matt Johnson, who is a marketer, speaker, and founder of a PR and production agency who's based in San Diego. And he deals with a lot of thought leaders in his space. And as an entrepreneur and an innovator himself, we thought it would be wonderful to get him on the podcast to talk about his thought leadership theories, and also a little bit about what he is actually, the space that he's working in now. So welcome, Matt.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for me. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, we are very excited, especially, the last 5 minutes when we were talking about, some of the focus areas, and when we talked about thought leadership. And would you like to talk about that? Michelle and I just went, yes, let's talk about thought leadership. And the reason why we think thought leadership is so important is, as we were discussing, in any environment, you actually need to take responsibility for your career, how you want to be, the reputation you want to be known for, because if you don't determine what you want to be known for, people are going to do it to you. So don't you want to be in charge?
It's so funny you say that. I think you must have.
We were in a workshop the other day, and we were just talking about, writing a purpose statement as a leader, and somebody said, and it was similar to that, and it was like, if you don't write your own story, somebody else is going to write it for you, and it's like, oh my God, that's so true.
So I'm dying over here because I literally did a Facebook Live about this yesterday. That was that exact topic. We must be sharing some sort of brain or something. Yeah. But yeah, it's absolutely true. I work with a lot of people who have been on that journey to establish themselves. And for anyone who is a high level of skill, you've typically picked up a lot of other skills and interests along the way. So a lot of times your biggest challenge is deciding. What are you going to be known for, right? Because there's so many different things, so many different directions you could go in. And if you're in the corporate world, you've got your day job to be concerned with. You've got a lot of things on your mind. And it's hard to kind of figure out, well, what is what's my personal brand? The thing is that exactly like you said, if you don't tell people what your personal brand is, your personal brand becomes whatever they pick up from osmosis. Occasional bits on social media, the interactions they have with you in or outside the office, who knows, right? If you don't tell people what you want to be known for, they're going to come up with whatever they're going to come up with, and it's probably not going to be what you want. I remember walking into to a workshop a while back and getting introduced as the quote unquote the podcast guy, and I'm like, not really, I host podcasts, but that was the thing, is I didn't define who I wanted to be known as. I didn't write my own story, or at least I wasn't articulating it to that particular group of people yet. I didn't get a chance to tell them what I was, and somebody introduced me and completely changed the frame of how I wanted to be introduced with just a couple of words. And then I had to roll that back and undo it. So I think that happens to us all the time if we don't control it.
How did you roll it back? Because I'm sure that happens to a lot of us.
It absolutely does. I had to, what it comes down to is I had to tell them a better story. Let's put it that way. So I basically had to sit back and say, nope, I'm not the podcast guy. I'm the guy that makes people micro-famous. And everybody's like, okay, now what did you just say? It was like a total pattern interrupt. I'm like, okay, now I've got you. Now we're back on track. So if you have that, if you know what you want to stand for and you've got it down into like 1 to 2 sentences where it's very clear and compelling, you can absolutely reset it. But it's a lot better if you get to set it first.
Yeah. So could you see this working for someone who wants to be promoted, but there's nothing obvious in their organisation right now that they could step into? How could they weave this into an approach so that when the opportunity comes up, they are the person that someone taps on the shoulder?
Well, I know it because I've lived it, although someone had to push me to do it. So flashback 5 years, I was just some dude working in a marketing agency. I was an account manager. I was working with clients, and I got the opportunity to move up and get into like the marketing business development side. Super, super awesome. So the CEO starts, he rolls into the office one day here in San Diego, and he sticks his finger up in the air. He's like, Johnson, you need to start blogging. I'm like, what now? Like, yeah, I've got enough on my plate. Like, what do you mean I need to start blogging? He's like, no, seriously, you should, he's like, you need to start sharing like the experiments that you're doing behind the scenes with the things that you're doing for clients. And he's like, you know what you should talk about how Matt Johnson is like relentlessly pursuing results. And that stuck, right? I bought the website domain, and that became my first company name, Pursuing Results. But I lived through the transition of just being a guy that worked at a company that couldn't get people on, and I'm talking about, I can point you specific people that I vividly remember not being able to get on the phone, to then being able to get them on the phone, to them being honored that they were on a podcast with me. The same people. The same exact people. It was crazy. So I lived through that transition of just being somebody that was within somebody else's organization and then creating a platform for myself where I started putting content in front of the right people that positioned me as an authority. And it viscerally and very, very quickly changed the perception of me from just somebody that was an employee to someone who was an authority and an expert in what I did. And then that's what actually set the stage for my first podcast. And then the podcast kept that thing going, and it carried me through from being an employee to an individual consultant to then an agency owner. And that same platform carried me through and like built my authority up the whole way. So yeah, I mean, anybody can do it. You just have to start.
So to that point, creating the platform, sharing the information, building the authority. So there are clear steps that happen. How did you know what platform and what information to share? Because I'm just thinking for corporate people, we've got LinkedIn. Is a corporate platform, and plus they've got their own internal platforms that they could use as well. Can you share anything about platforms and the type of information you shared?
Well, the type of information is probably the easiest because it breaks down into 3 things: what you know, what you're learning, and what you're doing. And so that was the easy part for me because I was already working behind the scenes with clients. So we were already doing experiments on things like, raising their email open and click rates or getting better responses out of their videos and just the practical stuff that we were doing. It was stuff that we were already doing. It wasn't even, I didn't consider it special. And so when the CEO came to me and said, you need to start blogging about this, my first response was, why? Like, this is just our job. This is what we're being paid to do. And it's like, no, they don't realize that. They don't realize all the stuff you're doing behind the scenes. And if you don't share it, they'll never know. So you always start with just what you know, what you're learning, what you're doing, because everybody has that in their life. And there's always, you have to think about the fact that there are people that you're speaking to that don't know that information. Exactly. And they're not like, look, if you're working for a company that's being paid to do something, they're not experts in what you do. That's why your company got hired to do the thing, because the client isn't the expert, so they don't know. So what you may think of as boring or routine or whatever, and just sharing the ordinary stuff of the business is not ordinary to them. Now, whether it's super interesting or not, kind of depends on what you're doing. You can make almost anything interesting. So you start there. As far as platforms, LinkedIn is great. I would start there. I happened to start with a WordPress blog, and then I emailed the contents out to clients, and that worked fine. But I could have just easily started on LinkedIn, and I think would have had the exact same result.
And how did you know that you were heading in the right direction? Was it the level of engagement or just how you felt? What were the signs?
It was the level of engagement, and it was how I felt. It was how I felt when I got on the phone with clients. after 2 or 3 months of writing that blog. You could hear it, you could feel it, more responsive to getting on the phone, right? Easier to get a hold of them when typically like our clients are super busy entrepreneurs. They were famously unavailable. But when I started doing that blog and emailing that out, that flipped, and then they became available. And then when I jumped on the phone with them, I started to have higher level discussions immediately. So I could feel it in the way that the conversations went when I was on the phone with them, the level of respect, the sense of authority, the permission they gave me to have a higher level of business conversation with them than I ever had before. So it was both. I definitely felt it on both levels.
The high level of conversation, was that in confidence and content?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, both. It was definitely, it was content in the sense that we started having more in-depth conversations around what was going on outside of our service, not about what my company did. Right. So that's when you know something different is going on. They're not asking about like, hey, are you guys following through on this, and this? Like it became about what was the bigger context of their business. And they changed. I mean, in my case, they changed to almost consulting calls. Right. Which is the same way I do sales calls today. It's much more about where their business is at. And then the pitch is actually very, very short because so like it even spilled over into the way that I do sales calls today. So it changed the quality of the conversation, and then it changed the level of permission and the confidence that I had in the calls themselves.
Are you still doing your blog, or is it just podcasting now?
It's just podcasting now because we talk about all the same content.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what's interesting, what I'm trying to do is put myself in our audience's shoes, and particularly the corporates, and what you said rang true in terms of you just need to decide. And we're known to be very practical in our approach. So if we did have a middle level manager ready for the next big promotion, it seems very un-Australian to promote yourself. However, right, if you are sharing knowledge, people are more open to that idea because it's something that everybody would want to know. What could be the next practical steps that they could take if they did want to become a thought leader in their area, in their division, in their organization?
Well, definitely something as simple as a weekly blog post or an article on LinkedIn, and that would be great. Beyond that, I think the most important thing you could do, and this applies even if you would consider yourself a lower or a mid-level manager and you don't think there's really anything special about you, I guarantee if I jumped on the phone with you, I can find what's special about you. There's something that there's something that you can become known for that you can go out and speak on. So if you think about that, and I want to talk about it from maybe the perspective of being more on the introverted side, because I feel like extroverts don't have this as much. It's like, hey, there's a stage. Let's get up on it. Where's the camera? That's cool. I wasn't like that. I was freaking out before my first webinars and podcasts. I'm an introvert who knows how to turn it on when I need it. Like after we get done, I'm going to have a great time with you on the podcast. After we get done, I'm going to go have a cheeseburger and I'm going to sleep. You know what I'm saying? So I get it. Like I'm a natural introvert. So for anyone else that's out there that identifies with that, here's what I would do, knowing what I know. I would go out and I would find podcasts that talk about the areas that I'm passionate about, and I would pitch myself as a guest. Because podcasts give you this amazing ability to have like what we're having, this great in-depth, content-heavy discussion that introverts love, where you get to dig into the nuts and bolts pretty quickly. You skip all the small talk and stuff. We can talk about that stuff later. I have no idea where you guys live. We talked briefly about the weather, and then we jumped into this super awesome conversation about leadership and stuff like that. Perfect for introverts, right? Skip the small talk and let's get to the deep stuff, right? So podcasts are perfect for that. Podcasts are also great for introverts because they make you the spotlight. So right away, the frame is perfect. You don't have to carry the conversation. You're there to be the spotlight. You're there to be the feature, and someone else is pitching you questions. Introverts tend to do really well in that format. So there's so many great things about podcasting. And even when I launched my own podcast as the host, a lot of those same benefits are there. So I get to do all these sorts of fun conversations, but I'm not doing it in a cocktail party or in between sessions at an event where my brain is full with dealing with the social stuff of people everywhere. I get to be in my space here. This is my comfortable, like it's my space. I get to have awesome conversations and meet new people, but physically, I don't even have to leave the house. So my brain is only having to operate like at half speed because I'm not having to think about all the social stuff of being out in public with people and trying to have these conversations.
Perfect.
So,
because we're actually a personality profiler. So we use the Myers-Briggs, and we talk a lot about introversion and extroversion. And so we understand that expansion, the expenditure of energy for people with introversion. So even in a corporate environment, like a lot of companies now have their own internal podcasts as well. So whether or not you do internally or externally, I think it's a wonderful way to, like you said, showcase your depth of knowledge, which usually people with introversion have the depth, whereas the extroverts usually have the breadth of information.
Right.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is that you talk a lot about, the best leaders create environments that make it nearly impossible for people to fail. And you say that it starts with the discipline to document and build great systems. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. I picked this up from one of my first clients. He was actually my first consulting client, and then we launched a podcast together, which we co-hosted for a couple of years, actually. And he is a guy that runs a 7-figure real estate business here in the States. He nets $1 million in personal income off that business and runs it in less than 1 day a week. He got it down to where he was spending, I think, 3 hours on Tuesdays to run that team. What's funny is that he's not the only one to do it. I had another client. I helped him launch a podcast, and he's done the same thing. This is extremely uncommon. I managed to have 2 of the only guys who've done it. So I had that in my background. So when I got into running my agency, that was the expectation. Like, I'm going to get it to the point where the operations of the business is going to take me less than a half a day a week, and that's where it is now. It takes me 4 to 6 hours a week. The only reason I was able to get there, and I watched him, I watched how it operated in a couple of other businesses, so I knew what the path was. The path was, you don't hire rock star people first and then expect them to hit the ground running. You build rock star systems first. You plug people in who can operate the systems, and then every once in a while, one of those people will be rock stars, and they'll help you build and improve your systems. One of the things that he said, this particular team leader said to me, is he said, look, I don't want to have a business where I'm a hostage to a few key people.
Yeah.
Right. And this, I think this holds true more for small businesses than it does for big corporations, but I think it's universally true no matter what, which is, there's a couple of different ways that you can build it. You can say it's all about people and culture, and you'll end up with, you might end up with a great group of people, but it's like a sports team. If it's not the exact right mix of people and chemistry and timing and blah, blah, then your performance drops. But if you have rock star systems, you can have people who are average and above. And as long as the people don't dip below average, they just keep running the systems, and the systems make sure that everything runs at a really high quality level. And then when you do get a rock star in there, they help you build the next round of systems, and then they can leave, because they will. And we all know it, right? When they leave the systems better. Yeah, and then they pass it on to the next person. So your business continues to get better. And this applies whether you run a business or whether you run a division. Like, you can, as long as you've got some autonomy, you can run any sort of a business unit within a larger organization with that mentality.
And what I love about that is that you're using the power of leverage and also delegation, because delegation is another way of describing having a really good system in place. Because you're not reliant on a person, it's the system that's doing it.
Yeah. And so I'd like to explore that, because we often talk about people and process. I'd like for us to now explore a little bit about, so what are some of the systems, if you wanted to start there, we're convinced that yes, it is systems, and I really want to give that some more energy and focus. What sort of advice would you give to people if they wanted to build up their system so that they did have some rock star systems?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is you can turn anything that you have to do more than once into a system.
Yeah.
So the way that I think about it is, a system makes tomorrow easier, which means there's a little bit more effort today, but it makes tomorrow easier. So if I were to say that, like, really, there's only 3 or 4 really essential systems in any business. You've got the system for how you deliver the product or service to the clients, and you've got the system for how you bring new clients into the business. Right now, if you're managing a unit, that may be a little bit different for you, because you may have responsibility only a certain part of that. But if you're an entrepreneur or a small business owner, you've got responsibility for all of it. So you kind of have to choose. Typically, I would recommend choosing the operations side first, because if you get happy clients, they're going to tell other people about you, and then that forms the foundation of getting more clients. Then you can worry about better sales systems later, which is the same thing I did. So I started at the bottom. When I first started the agency, I was doing every part of it. So I was, even editing the audio on my own podcast. So that's the same for any small business owner. You're the person, you're doing everything. So you start by documenting what you're doing, even if it's as simple as a little checklist and an over-the-shoulder video of you doing something. So that's the simplest place to start. But once you build up that library and just one small step at a time, one system at a time, then you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, there's really only a couple of places where me being super special and awesome really makes a difference. And that's really good news, right? It maybe hurts the ego a little bit, but you realize that, okay, this system goes like this. And then there's a couple of spikes in there where if I get involved, I make a massive difference. And if I'm not involved, things can go wrong. Great. Now you can hire everything else.
Yeah.
And as a leader, you can start to delegate, even if you're managing a division of somebody else's company, like that's your job. Your job is to focus on the most effective parts of it and delegate everything else. I mean, that's classic Peter Drucker stuff.
So what's interesting also about that is that we have, or a lot of managers have this assumption that it has to be about the people first and foremost. And so if I can get a great team who have trust, and absolutely we are really big into having the, good interpersonal skills. However, there is something about having good processes that allows those people to bring in their genius and to, make a better system than you've got, and I'm also working with some people at the moment, and they're growing really, really fast. And, the one thing that's holding them back are the systems and the processes, because that's boring. And that's what it is for entrepreneurs. It's like, and sometimes the successful stuff is going to be boring. And that's one of the things that I think is really holding them back, is that the documentation and like, so how do we move a widget from here? I'd rather actually just get the team together and give them a bit of a rah-rah. And that is definitely going to hold them back. And so how do you overcome that propensity? Because it can feel a little bit, like drudgery.
Well, I think the most practical tip I can give is to get your people involved in helping you create the system. So rather than you putting it all on yourself as a leader, I started to ask myself this even as recently as just a few months ago. I started to shift the way that I build systems from me doing it all to me having my team interview me for us to create the initial checklist. Right. Then they go back and they refine and stuff like that. So that's number one. Number two, for anyone that kind of bucks against the idea of systems coming before people, I mean like chronologically. I don't mean like in level of importance. I mean, at the end of the day, your people are your most important asset in a human capital sense. And I get that. So my question would be, what happens when a mistake is made? If you're only focused on people, then you immediately have to address the people. And it typically ends up becoming like this behavior and identity question. Why are you doing this to me? How could you make this? How could you decide to do this? How could you ignore my clear instruction? And I don't do any of that because our business is so well systematized. When something happens and there's a mistake made in the business, my first question isn't, why did you do that? My first question is, did we follow the system? And if the answer is yes, then it completely shifts the focus off of their behavior and their character, and it becomes an issue of, did we follow the system? Okay, great. Now, how do we need to improve the system to make sure that mistake doesn't happen again? It completely shifts the focus off of anything that is a personal attack against them. And then if the answer to that comes back, yes, we did deviate from the system, then I'm going to go, okay, how do we change the system so it doesn't, you know what I'm saying?
Build it into the system. I love that.
Yes, yeah. So so like my people know that they're, like I'm a perfectionist, but my people know that if something goes wrong, they're not going to get burned. I'm not gunning for them, and it's not a personal attack. Those are always my first two questions. I think it also helps. So my key people have been with me for years, even though I actually haven't been in the business for that long in the big scheme of things, because I don't burn through people. And because they know that our focus is just on improving the systems, they feel like they can also push the feedback up to where they say, look, like this makes my job more difficult. Like I have to make judgment calls here. I have to do this here where I'm not sure what you think. Like all that feedback flows up to me, and then I can create resources for them that help either make those decisions in advance or tell them exactly which things need my input and which don't. And we know that the focus is always just on doing what's best for the client. So even in a judgment call situation, we have such good systems that if they make what I think is a poor judgment call, but they made it in pursuit of trying to do the right thing for the client, I'm still going to back them up. And everybody knows that. So it just changes the culture internally.
Just writing notes. I've got about half a dozen clients who need to listen to this if they're going to sustain the level of growth that they're going through right now. Without a
So when you talked about feedback flowing up, is this something that you have built in? Like, is there a system for feedback? Like, how do you actually build feedback in?
So in our case, I have internally what I would call like a special projects coordinator, and she has a couple of functions. The first thing is to look for ways to improve the service for clients based on feedback internally and feedback from the clients. And then the second thing is to work on projects that fix inequality issues that come up. And so there's basically somebody who isn't me, isn't the big boss in the organization, who everybody else can go to, even if they don't feel like they can go to me and say, hey, Violet, I think I need to kind of fix this over here. And she's constantly looking for things that she can execute on. And she executes in 2-week sprints, and we review those projects every Tuesday morning as part of the operations calls. So we've got several projects running every single week where she's working on improving the service or fixing quality issues. And so, that's part of how, and it goes back to, you guys mentioned the virtual team thing. I don't have anybody in San Diego here with me. Part of the way we make that work is we are absolutely borderline fanatical about the weekly meetings. We do not skip. We do not shortcut. We do not waste the time. It's very metrics focused. It's very, if anybody knows the entrepreneurial operating system and the book Traction and Rocket Fuel and all those, that's kind of the system that we operate on. Having those meetings regularly and consistently asking for that feedback and then giving somebody a concrete person to go to that owns those projects is that combination of things, I think.
So what do you talk about in your weekly meetings? What is the process for your weekly meetings?
I can tell you exactly what we talk about in the weekly meetings.
Because Jan and I, we are all into that, having that consistent communication via weekly meetings, and people really resist that. And we say it doesn't have to take an hour; it can be half an hour, but it is that that interchange of information, and then you go and then you come back, and the more frequently you do it, the easier it allows you to tic-tac and make those changes.
Yeah, and I get where people are coming from, the resistance to meetings. So before I share what we talk about, there's a quick story that might help. So my business coach gave me a book recommendation from 100 years ago. It was written in 1916 by Henri Fayot, called General and Industrial Management. It's the driest book title in the history of mankind. It's one of the best books on management ever. And towards the end of the book, there's just a couple little sections, it's 3 pages, where he basically unlocks the entire secret of business and operation success, which is planning on the front end, reporting on the back end, meetings in between. Now, his perspective on meetings, though, is insane. Now, listen to this. He says, look, it's not enough to have regular meetings. You can't just have regular one-on-one meetings with your key people. He said, get them, he's talking about in a manufacturing capacity. He says, get everybody onto a floor, get them standing up, together, and have them do the meeting where everyone reports their numbers in front of all their peers. So that was one of the things that turned on the light bulb for me. I'm like, oh, because I was doing regular one-on-one meetings. I wasn't doing as much as a group because it was virtual teams. So I was trying to be sensitive to people's time. No, one of the things he pointed out was that people can hide things when they're in one-on-one meetings, but if they're in front of their peers, they can't hide. So the truth tends to come out. So anyway, as a leader, just reading little things like that, you're like, okay, now I get it. That's why I should do regular meetings, and I should do them with a group.
And so what are some of the things that people are reporting on in your business? What are some of the metrics?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, we talk about the good news. Then we do the scorecard. I can talk about that in a second. Are we pushing clients enough to get what we need? Are we looking 2 to 3 weeks ahead? That's kind of unique to our business. Client and employee headlines, to-do list, issues, and then a recap. And then we're talking about the special projects that I mentioned. So as far as the scorecard, one of the things that I'm working on in the business right now is making sure that every position in the business has one key metric that they have control of and ownership over. Right. And then maybe, and in some of their cases, they might have a supporting metric or two that kind of, it's not as important, but maybe they're leading indicators that lead up to the big one that they're responsible for. Because I want those early warning signs. I want them to know very clearly, and this is really key for a virtual environment, I want them to know with certainty what I expect out of them. That what I expect is not a feeling of me being secure with their performance. I want numbers, right? So as long as they're hitting their numbers, I'm fine, right? Now, if we're getting, bad client feedback or something that overrides that, there's checks and balances in place. But for the most part, if I hire you to do something, I'm going to give you a number. And if you're hitting the number, we're cool. So that helps everybody be secure. It helps them understand who else in the organization is doing a great job and who's slipping. So that also, raises the transparency level. There's a lot of benefits to that, but that's been a journey for about the last 6 months of not just tracking numbers and not just telling people what I want, but making sure that everybody has one and only one metric that they take complete ownership of. Because that drives the behavior. Now, when you actually constructed the metric, did you do that in joint consultation or how did you come to agreement? For now, I did it for the most part behind the scenes. I would change that if I had to do it over. Sure. And I'm looking for feedback from those key people. But in my particular case, I did kind of figure out which, because I had done every role. Sure. If I hadn't done every role, I would have gotten more feedback from them. So now we're in the process of letting that naturally evolve and letting their feedback dictate what metrics they take ownership of.
So how do you gather the metrics? Like who is responsible for pulling together the data that creates the metric that you report on?
So everybody tracks their own, whatever they're responsible for, they have some sort of tracking mechanism and I have access to it, but I try not to dip in. So they keep track of it for their own. So that they can come and report the key metric, which is reported in the meetings. And then my special projects coordinator who runs that meeting tracks those, records everything so we could go back in the meetings and see what those key metrics were and stuff like that. So yeah, it's all super fun spreadsheets.
Yeah. But, however, it's made meaningful by the discussion and the conversation that comes out of it, with anything. And I'm just thinking people in the corporate environment, all of them have performance indicators. However, we want to ensure that they're meaningful and that they have control over them because then they're more likely to actually be more invested, aren't they?
Yeah, that's a big one. I was thinking about this because I was on a call with somebody that my clients hired. And one of their goals was increase podcast downloads by 5% by a certain date. I'm like, you realize you have no control over that's a metric it looks good on a spreadsheet or on a pitch deck, but you don't actually have any control of that. And I definitely wouldn't commit to doing that for the client because you don't have direct control over whether people download their podcast. So there was something that and I was working with my business coach about this because he's really good at breaking down sales prospecting numbers and how much you have to care about. And it came out in a discussion with them, just the separation between performance goals and outcome goals.
Yes.
Right. You can set outcome goals all you want, but I don't think you can hold people accountable to them and they buck up and they rebel against it as well they should. But I think there's a lot of leaders that go, hey, we need to get to X. And all the followers are going, yeah, but how do I know if I'm doing a good job? And the only way to give them that is to say, look, I want to get to here. I run a real estate team and I want to sell 1,000 houses this year, but that's not your responsibility. My responsibility is to help figure out what are your performance goals that I think will get us to that big goal. That's the leader's responsibility.
Absolutely, because that's what you can control. How many times you get on the phone, how many sales conversations that you have, etc. Absolutely. So I just wanted to ask you, in relation to running virtual teams, because we've got a number of managers here. So you talked about the importance of having the meetings and discussing the metrics at the the back end. Is there any other skill you think that a leader needs in order to facilitate a really good virtual team?
Yes. Do you guys remember the book High Performance Teams from back in the day? 90s, I think.
Oh, yeah. It rings a bell.
Yeah? Okay. So I was reading that again because my coach recommended it.
Who was the author? High Performance
It was two guys, which makes it hard because now I can't remember either of them.
I do know it. Yes, I do know it.
A couple of consultants in the corporate world.
Yes.
So the thing that I pulled from there is that one of the things that makes high performance teams, especially when you have them in big organizations where it can get really nebulous and you're reporting across, like there's no clear chain of command. You're just kind of trying to pull resources together to get stuff done.
Yeah.
In those types of environments, the leader that is most effective is the one that's most on a mission themselves and then gets other people to believe in it. You know, so like that's where I felt like I had to grow this year, was to get more clear, because I run such a business that could be construed as like a lifestyle business.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm not just, dinking around, hanging out at the beach the other 30 hours of the week. I'm doing other things. So I had to, like I'm on a personal mission. I had to enlist the rest of the team and show them how the things that they're doing for the clients are having a bigger effect on their clients, the clients of our clients. And our mission is to help launch new thought leaders into the world, right? Because they have content that's life-changing. So I'm hoping to, I want to do a better job of conveying that to my team. But then the other part of that is I want to help them kind of achieve the lifestyle that I've achieved. So I'm helping certain ones of them become entrepreneurs themselves. And there's different things that don't really have to do with necessarily the business, but it's more about how I run it and how I help them grow personally that helps them enlist into the mission. So I think that's the one key thing, is just to be mission driven yourself, and then do everything you can to get other people aligned and enlisted in the mission. And that will make more of a difference than probably anything else.
Oh, absolutely. And it comes down to clarity, because if you're really clear in the direction that you're going, when you're off track and on track, and then you have that ability to actually influence people because you are so clear, because there is alignment between your thoughts, words, actions, emotions.
That's so true. Yeah. I mean, people wildly underestimate the link between clarity and influence. And when they don't influence people, it's tied to a lack of clarity in them. So even I couldn't have articulated it that way 30 seconds ago. So now I have some thinking about that to do. But it is absolutely true.
So Matt, as we're wrapping up now, is there anything in particular that you're working on that that we can tap into? Because this has just been such a rich conversation.
Yeah, we went way down the leadership track, which I love. Although it doesn't have anything to do with the outward facing stuff of what I do with thought leaders necessarily. Yeah, so the thing that I'm most excited about, I've got my podcast relaunching. I've got the book coming out. It's all based around the concept of being micro-famous, becoming famously influential to the right people. And no matter what kind of leader you are, there's an element there where people need your leadership to be validated by other people that they respect. So you mentioned having, kind of your internal communication, maybe your internal networks, your Facebook workplace, your internal intranet, your whatever. It's great to be famous there. It's a lot better to be famous externally. Yeah. And then bring that into those environments, if that makes sense. So that's why I mentioned getting interviewed on podcasts, because no matter what you do internally by sharing your expertise, it's never quite as valuable and recognized as valuable by people until they see you being validated by other leaders.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Right. Yeah. So that, the thing that I have to help out with that is if you go to pursuingresults.com/training, there's a training there on how to put your story hook together and really craft the story of your expertise and your leadership and how you discovered it and stuff like that, so that if you want to, you can go out and get pitched, and podcast hosts will be starving to get you on to interview you. It's the reason I'm here today. It's the same system that my staff runs internally for me. And it's doing the same thing for me, right? The audience of people that see me on social media, if all I did was just share my stuff with them one-to-one or one-to-one to my social media audience, it wouldn't make anywhere near as difference as me saying, hey, I just got interviewed about leadership, right? And then sharing that with them. So yeah, that's my best encouragement. Keep an eye out for the MicroFamous book and the podcast and all that stuff. But yeah, that training would be really good for anyone that just wants to take that first step into thought leadership.
Great, and we'll put that in the show notes as well.
I've got a sort of a last question, and Jan and I are really into health and well-being, and we feel that is the foundation of sustainable leadership. And so the question to you is, how do you look after yourself?
Well, number one, I don't schedule anything past noon, except for you ladies typically. So it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here. I had to not take a nap today to jump on with you guys.
Thank you.
I am much better nowadays at working with my own natural rhythms, because I've got, I deal with chronic fatigue and autoimmune stuff. Like, I can't work 40, 50, 60 hours a week straight and be my best. It's not going to happen. And I know that I go and I have ebbs and flows of like high cognitive state and stuff like that. So I don't book anything past noon in terms of calls. Everything after noon is optional. And for the most part, I go to a Starbucks or whatever, and that's my time to write and like be all introverted. I introverted up in the afternoon. That's probably the best way that I do self-care within the context of business.
Fantastic.
That's brilliant.
I love it.
Okay, so Michelle, what's been your biggest takeaway?
Oh no, look, Jan, I've just got my biggest takeaway are like 4 pages of notes, and I'm going to listen to this again. The biggest thing for me is about the systems. Like, start with the systems, get rock star systems. It's like, of course, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, because awesome. Then you can work on your genius.
That's right.
Which is always going to add so much more value. So it's brilliant. Thank you so much, Matt. This has been a gift.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you so much.
We'll get you on again when your book comes out.
Yes.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I'd love to. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Over and out.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the People Leaders Podcast. For show notes and other resources, please visit us at peopleleaderspodcast.com. And while you're there, you can subscribe for future episodes so you can continue your own leadership journey. And please be sure to share this and other episodes with your friends and colleagues. The People Leaders Podcast is brought to you by the Experts on Air Podcast Network.